Hey everyone, so we're going to jump right into it and ask the big question, is there mold in my home? I hear that question a lot, and sometimes it's hard to know the answer to that, but here are some things that will tip you off if you have a problem. Do you have consistent headaches? Do you have stuffy nose when you wake up almost every day that you're in your house? Or perhaps your eyes burn at certain times. Those could all be symptoms of what would we call mold in your home, or actually the more blanket type of a term is fungi or even microbial growth. Mold actually, it doesn't encompass a certain species, which you can see some of these listed here. Those would actually be a species of mold, but it's easy to say. People use that term because they feel like, well, that covers everything. But it actually, remember, it's just a certain type of what we would call fungi or microbial growth. But the question again goes back to, well, do I have it? Now, if you are experiencing those problems, I'm not a health professional and I'm not going to give you health advice, but if you do have chronic headaches or things like that, definitely go see a health professional and see if there's any other cause that may be going on. But hopefully you'll be okay on that. But again, those are just common symptoms that people do experience if they're living in a home that is dense in microbial growth. So number one, you definitely want to go out and get a test performed. Now there's lots of companies that can do these tests. Even some home inspectors conduct these tests. But just make sure that the certifications that they hold, again, many different types, are approved by the IICRC, and that's the Institute of Inspection, Cleaning, and Restoration Certificate. So just make sure, go ahead and ask the question, make sure they are certified or approved, their certification is approved by that organization. All right, so you have the test performed and you come back and you realize, wow, we do have some issues in the house, and that test will be specific. It will tell you what's going on inside the home, and then you'll then know that yes, there is an issue. Number two, you got to start asking, why is it there? That's very important because generally there's only one culprit to why it is there, and that is moisture. Moisture usually drives the growth of fungi. So if you have, let's go over to this diagram. If you have a home, the green represents the microbial growth inside the rooms that may be airborne, but the blue represents moisture. And I'm going to give you three different areas where moisture generally enters the home. Number one, let's talk about moisture coming through. Let's per se there's a bad leak at a roof vent, and that black line going up through represents a plumbing vent. So just and this is a bathroom here, bedrooms, kitchen, whatnot. But just imagine that the pipe, maybe there's a leak around that boot, and it's been leaking up there for a while, and it runs down that pipe and ultimately gets inside the wall and just kind of sits in there for a while. Now there's two things that, again, generally activate the growth of fungi. Number one, presence of moisture. Number two, temperature. When both of those are satisfied, you can expect to see some sort of growth, like a petri dish. Remember back in science class when you put the petri dish in the incubator and a couple days later it's furry. Similar scenario here. This is like a petri dish. When water and temperature are provided to a food source, which is wood, drywall, carpeting, that's when things start to grow. So we've got a leak going on here for an undetermined amount of time. Maybe there's a closet here and you don't notice a water stain on the ceiling, or of course this wall is enclosed and you don't see anything there. But every time it rains, water just continually feeds this growth. And before long, you start to wake up. Again, you experience those symptoms and you get a test performed. But that's one reason or way water can get in the house. Number two, it's an interior leak. This is a bathroom, there's a toilet. Just for instance, maybe the seal on the floor is bad on that toilet and it's leaking in the ceiling or the floor, the ceiling of this room and the floor of this room, and it's maybe running down the wall here. Again, maybe it's hard to determine whether it's where you can't really see it. Maybe it's a tile floor and it's really not noticeable. Under here, maybe there's kitchen cabinets and you can't see a stain. But long story short is you've got an issue there and it's been going on for several months, maybe longer. And that will also develop that microbial growth, as we talked about earlier. When the conditions are met, you can expect that. And third, probably the biggest way that it starts to happen is from the foundation. I've got two separate types here. This is a crawl space. This is a basement. Now, see the grading on the outside. This is the grading or the backyard. Notice how it slopes toward the house. Every time it rains out here, water will accumulate in this crawl space and just sit there because nobody goes in these crawl spaces. it sits there, the humidity skyrockets well over 60%. Maybe it's up to 70, 80, 90%. The temperature is satisfied during the summer seasons or warm times of the year. And where I live, roughly May through October, it's pretty mild and warm, obviously. And so that microbial growth will begin to develop on the floor joist. Notice the intensity level just skyrockets because wood is readily available, the feeding source, humidity is available, and temperature is available. So that's how it starts to happen, really starts to grow, and then it starts to leak up into the home, and you start to get traces in the air in the home. And secondly, you have this basement. So it starts to saturate that foundation wall. Same thing, there's an interior wall, starts to get saturated, and then it starts to develop in the wall. Now, in most modern building, they generally incorporate drainage systems. They encase the foundation in a water seal. So they really try to do their best. But even that, one small crack or one hole or even a bad grade will allow water to enter into the home. And this scenario can happen quite quickly. So these are three scenarios where microbial growth can start to grow in the home. And that's how it gets there. So now that you know that you've got it, and you figure out why that it's there, now it's time to make that plan. That's when you call in a professional. It could be an environmental cleanup professional or restoration professional to come in, take a look at the issue, determine what it's going to take to fix that. In these cases here, the fixes can be quite expensive because they're going to have to figure out a way to stop water from coming in. And then also, if it gets in, they got to figure out a way to get it out. Maybe it's encapsulation, dehumidification, improving the grade, perimeter drains. It just has to be left up to the professional to determine which is the best case scenario, and of course your budget as well. Secondly, in this type of scenario, it could involve a drying system being put in, also a dehumidifier as well. So there's definitely more cost involved in these scenarios than these localized scenarios that I mentioned earlier. Could there be destructive work here where they have to take the ceiling out and work on things? Sure, absolutely. But the big thing is that they are somewhat localized. And so the scope of work would be relatively smaller compared to something like this where the floor joists are completely saturated and also just have growth all over them. In some instances, if this is a 20, 30-year-old issue, floor joists can actually be rotten. And here's an example of a photo that I took where the floor joist was so rotten that I was able to take a metal piece of plumbing tape and stick it through the joist because they had become so deteriorated over time. So anyway, now you've got that plan made, and lastly, it's time to execute the plan and begin the cleanup in that. So it's a bit of an issue in terms of the plan and cost and when to get that done. But once you get there, you'll be so glad you did. And lastly, this is just kind of a rough map of where you can expect to see. Now the red would indicate it's drier. Of course, that's the Southwest, really dry out there. Moisture is not as available, so the issues of microbial growth in homes isn't quite as much. It still can enter via the air conditioning system and leaks and so forth. But in terms of groundwater or rain, it's not quite as heavy. So it's going to be a little bit less of a frequency here. Now, in the rest of the country, usually where you get rain, you can expect to see these problems quite a bit. And unfortunately, you see them on a daily basis. So with that said, remember, get a test done first. Try to figure out why it's there, make a plan, and execute the plan. Hope that helps. Thanks for watching. Have a great one.